Lee Labrada is a name that commands instant respect in bodybuilding. A former IFBB professional athlete, he wasn't just a top-level competitor, but also an author, an entrepreneur, and one of the greatest references when it comes to muscular aesthetics. While many athletes were chasing sheer size, Labrada became known for something far rarer: balance. Born on March 8, 1960, in Havana, Cuba, Lee moved to the United States at a very young age. It was there that he built his entire personal and professional journey, far from his Caribbean roots, but guided by an incredibly disciplined mindset. The nickname "Mass with Class" didn't come out of nowhere. It perfectly described what Labrada brought to the stage: dense, symmetrical, well-proportioned muscle, presented with elegance and control. Lee Labrada's story begins long before the bright lights of the bodybuilding stage. Still a baby, he left Cuba with his family and immigrated to the United States, starting a new life far from his homeland. That early experience of change and adaptation helped shape a resilient personality, something that later showed clearly in his attitude both inside and outside the sport. During childhood and his teenage years, Lee grew up first in Florida and later in Texas, where he was constantly involved in sports and physical activity. From an early age, he showed a natural interest in movement, strength, and physical performance, long before competition was even on his radar. It wasn't about vanity, but about curiosity and the discipline of developing his own body. At age 16, weight training became a permanent part of his life. Inspired by icons like Frank Zane, Sergio Oliva, Steve Reeves, and Dave Draper, Lee began to see bodybuilding as an art form, not just a display of raw strength. At the same time, Lee never neglected his education. He enrolled at the University of Houston, where he studied civil engineering, a field that demands logic, planning, and precision. Lee Labrada's first steps in bodybuilding were anything but glamorous. In 1978, still a teenager, he stepped on stage for the first time at the AU Teenage Mr. Jacksonville. There was no trophy, no spotlight, and not even a noteworthy placing. For many, that could have been the early end of a dream. For Lee, it was simply the beginning of the learning process. Instead of getting discouraged, Lee treated that experience as an honest assessment. He realized that bodybuilding required far more than enthusiasm and decided to take a step back to build something solid. For about 4 years, he stayed away from competitions and focused entirely on training, nutrition, and physical development, with no rush and no shortcuts. That quiet preparation period was crucial. While others were competing non-stop, Lee dedicated himself to studying his own body, fine-tuning methods, and developing a balanced muscular foundation. It was during this time that he began applying, in a very practical way, the analytical mindset he had developed in college. His return to the stage came in 1982, and it was impactful. Lee won the NPC Texas Collegiate Championships and, in the same year, also captured the NPC Junior Gulf Coast Championships. These wins were no coincidence. They reflected years of discipline, patience, and careful planning. From that point on, everything changed. Lee Labrada was no longer just another young competitor. He was now seen as a legitimate rising star in amateur bodybuilding. The year 1985 was the true turning point in Lee's life. After years of preparation away from the spotlight, he entered the NPC Nationals with one clear goal: earning his long-awaited IFBB Pro card. On stage, he presented an incredibly refined, balanced, and mature physique, earning the overall victory and finally turning professional. But Lee didn't stop there. That same year, he competed at the IFBB World Amateur Championships, facing high-level athletes from around the world. Once again, his combination of symmetry, conditioning, and flawless presentation stood out. Winning that event cemented his name on the international stage and confirmed that his success was no fluke. As if that weren't enough, Labrada closed out 1985 with a historic achievement, winning the IFBB Mr. Universe in the middleweight class. At the time, this title was considered one of the most prestigious honors in global bodybuilding, almost like a definitive stamp of elite status. Winning Mr. Universe meant entering an extremely exclusive group. Those achievements completely changed his reality. Lee Labrada stopped being just a promising name and started being treated as one of the strongest figures of the new professional generation. From that moment on, his stage appearances stood out not only for his physique, but for the class and composure he brought every single time. That's when he made a crucial decision, walking away for good from his civil engineering career to dedicate himself 100% to bodybuilding. It was a risky move, with no guarantees, but it raised an inevitable question. What if that refined aesthetic was about to challenge the giants of the sport at the highest level? Lee Labrada's pro debut made one thing very clear. He wasn't there by accident. In 1986, in his very first major challenge on the professional circuit, he won the IFBB Night of Champions, beating competitors who were far more experienced. The following year, Lee stepped onto the most important stage in bodybuilding for the first time, the Mr. Olympia. From 1987 to 1993, he competed 7 years in a row, which is impressive on its own. Even more impressive was the outcome. In every single one of those appearances, Labrada finished in the top 4, something extremely rare in the history of the event. Some of those years became especially memorable. In 1989 and 1990, Lee came dangerously close to the top, finishing second place both times, losing only to the legendary Lee Haney, who was at the peak of his dominance. In 1987 and 1992, Labrada secured third place, consistently remaining among the absolute elite of world bodybuilding. What made this streak even more remarkable was the context. Lee was competing in an era increasingly dominated by massive physiques, yet he never abandoned aesthetics, symmetry, and refined presentation. To truly understand Lee Labrada's greatness, you have to look at who was standing next to him and against him on those stages. During his prime, Labrada competed head-to-head with some of the biggest legends in bodybuilding history, including Lee Haney, Rich Gaspari, Sean Ray, Flex Wheeler, and Dorian Yates. These weren't ordinary rivals. They were icons who helped define entire eras of the sport. That period marked a clear shift in bodybuilding. The sport was moving away from classic aesthetics and rapidly heading toward extreme size, with athletes becoming bigger, denser, and more massive each year. Among all those rivalries, one became especially symbolic: Lee Labrada versus Lee Haney. On one side, Haney represented an almost unbeatable combination of mass, structure, and raw power. On the other, Labrada stood as the ultimate example of symmetry, refinement, and flawless presentation. It wasn't just a battle for placings, it was a clash of philosophies within the sport itself. Those battles helped define Labrada's identity. Even when he didn't win, he stood out for something very few athletes could deliver: aesthetic consistency under maximum pressure. And that leads to an inevitable question that still sparks debate today. If Labrada had competed in a different era, one where aesthetics were more highly valued, would the outcome have been different? When talking about Lee Labrada's physique, the first thing that needs to be clear is that he was never the biggest guy on stage. Standing around 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighing roughly 185 to 195 pounds on stage, about 84 to 88 kilograms, Labrada was far from the extreme numbers that were starting to dominate bodybuilding at the time. Even so, very few athletes commanded as much attention as he did. The secret was his impeccable symmetry. Every muscle group flowed perfectly into the next, creating a clean, balanced look. His classic V-taper, with broad shoulders and an incredibly tight waist, made his physique look larger than it actually was when viewed from the front of the stage. Another standout factor was his muscle definition and maturity. Labrada displayed dense, well-polished muscle with excellent separation, without sacrificing aesthetic lines. Nothing looked exaggerated or out of proportion. His physique projected total control, the result of years of smart training and obsessive attention to detail. But perhaps the most underrated aspect of his physique was his posing. Lee Labrada didn't just hit poses, he told a story with them. His transitions were smooth, his posture confident, and every pose was displayed at the exact angle to highlight his strengths. That's what elevated his presentation to an artistic level. It's no coincidence that, decades later, his physique became a direct reference for classic physique. Modern athletes in that division are chasing exactly what Labrada was already delivering back in the 80s and 90s. Lee Labrada's training philosophy was always built on discipline and intelligence, not excess. He typically trained 6 days a week, using a 3-day split repeated twice, which allowed him to hit each muscle group 2 times per week. This setup helped maintain consistency without putting unnecessary stress on the body. More important than frequency was how he trained. Labrada placed absolute priority on perfect execution, strong mind-muscle connection, and total control of every movement. For him, lifting weights was never an ego contest. It was an exercise in precision. Every rep needed purpose, rhythm, and clear intent. His most common training split followed a simple and efficient structure. One day focused on chest and shoulders, the next on back and arms, and the third on legs and abs. This approach balanced volume and recovery while allowing full focus on each body part during the session. When it came to cardio, Labrada also took a moderate approach. He usually performed about 20 to 30 minutes, roughly 5 times per week, without turning cardio into something extreme or draining. The goal was to maintain conditioning and support fat loss, without sacrificing hard-earned muscle mass. Nutrition was always one of the most important pillars of Lee Labrada's career. He followed a simple but highly disciplined structure, based on 6 meals per day, each providing around 40 grams of protein. This strategy helped keep his metabolism active and ensured a steady supply of nutrients for muscle recovery and growth. The foundation of his diet was built around clean, functional foods. Labrada prioritized lean protein sources like egg whites, chicken breast, and fish, combined with complex carbohydrates such as oats, rice, and sweet potatoes. To round things out, he included healthy fats, mainly from fish oil, nuts, and olive oil, always in moderation. One of the most interesting aspects of his approach was practicality. Instead of relying solely on complex calculations, Lee used a visual portion method. Protein servings shouldn't be larger than the palm of his hand, while carbohydrates were limited to about the size of a clenched fist. This made the diet sustainable, even outside of a strict competition environment. Another key element was strategic flexibility. Labrada understood that the body doesn't have the same needs year-round. Because of that, he adjusted carbohydrate and fat intake depending on the training phase, increasing them during mass-gaining periods and reducing them during contest prep. Lee's retirement didn't mark an ending, but the beginning of a new and equally ambitious chapter. In 1995, after his final appearance at the Arnold Classic, he officially stepped away from competition. Unlike many athletes who completely disappear after leaving the stage, Labrada already had a clear vision of what would come next. Shortly after, he founded Labrada Nutrition, a supplement company built on the same philosophy that guided his career: quality, consistency, and education. Rather than just selling products, Lee wanted to teach people how to understand nutrition, body composition, and healthy habits, something that quickly set the brand apart in the market. Within a few years, Labrada Nutrition became one of the largest supplement companies in the United States, also gaining international recognition. The Labrada name came to represent not just stage aesthetics, but real credibility offstage as well. For many fans, seeing a former athlete succeed in business only strengthened his legacy. In 2005, Lee took another major step by releasing the book The Lean Body Promise, published by HarperCollins. The book became a bestseller by translating professional bodybuilding concepts into the everyday reality of regular people, with a focus on health, fat loss, and muscle maintenance. Official recognition of Lee Labrada's legacy came in undeniable fashion in 2004, when he was inducted into the IFBB Hall of Fame. This honor wasn't just about titles or placements, but about the lasting impact he had on bodybuilding as a whole. Being inducted meant his name was permanently etched alongside the greatest legends of the sport. But Labrada's influence went far beyond the stage. In the early 2000s, he was invited by the city of Houston to take on the role of fitness czar, leading the Get Lean Houston campaign. The goal was ambitious: to fight the city's high obesity rates and encourage healthier lifestyles for the general population. This initiative pushed Lee Labrada into the spotlight well beyond the bodybuilding world. He began appearing frequently on major media outlets like CNN, ESPN, Fox, NBC, ABC, and CBS, always as an expert in health, nutrition, and physical conditioning. His image evolved from being just an athlete to someone widely recognized as a true authority in the field. As his businesses grew and his media presence expanded, his net worth followed the same path. It's estimated that Lee Labrada has built a fortune somewhere between $5 and $10 million, the direct result of a career shaped by long-term vision, discipline, and credibility. Behind the legendary physique and the flawless career, Lee Labrada has always made one thing his top priority: family. Married to Robin Labrada for decades, he built a solid, low-key family life, far from the excesses that often surround professional bodybuilding. For Lee, success never made sense unless it was aligned with personal balance. Together with Robin, he is the father of Hunter, Blade, and Pierce, and he has always worked to pass on values like discipline, responsibility, and consistency. Unlike many athletes who live solely for the stage, Labrada has always made it clear that bodybuilding was just one part of life, not its absolute center. Naturally, the name that draws the most attention is Hunter Labrada, his oldest son. Hunter followed in his father's footsteps and became an IFBB professional bodybuilder, competing at the highest level and earning his place on the Mr. Olympia stage as one of the standout names of the new generation. More than just a father, Lee took on the role of a direct mentor in Hunter's career. He was actively involved in building Hunter's physique, shaping his nutrition strategy, and, most importantly, refining his stage presentation. The same attention to detail, symmetry, and posture that defined Lee's own career was passed down as a true technical legacy. Lee Labrada's legacy goes far beyond trophies and placings. He became the ultimate symbol that aesthetics, proportion, and discipline can absolutely stand up to extreme size. In an era dominated by ever bigger physiques, Labrada proved that harmony and control are also legitimate paths to greatness in bodybuilding. His influence has crossed generations. Modern classic physique athletes like Chris Bumstead, Terrence Ruffin, and Ramon Dino clearly carry elements of the philosophy Lee introduced decades ago. Clean lines, a tight waist, refined posing, and artistic presentation are values that now define an entire division, and all of that traces back, directly or indirectly, to Lee Labrada. Another factor that makes his legacy even stronger is longevity. Labrada wasn't a short-lived phenomenon. He stayed relevant for years at the highest competitive level, built a solid career outside the stage, and continues to be respected today as both a technical and moral reference within the sport. Professionalism was always his trademark. More than just an impressive physique, Lee left a clear message: bodybuilding can be art, science, and discipline at the same time. His name is still mentioned because it represents balance, something rare in a sport of extremes. He showed that it's possible to succeed without losing your identity. Now I want to hear from you. Which part of Lee Labrada's journey inspires you the most? His aesthetics, his consistency at the Olympia, his training mindset, or the legacy he passed on to Hunter? Drop your comment below. I read them all. If this video brought you value, hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming content about the greatest legends in bodybuilding. And if you want to support the channel even more, consider becoming a member. And don't leave just yet. On the end screen, you'll see another video from the channel that dives even deeper into this classic era of bodybuilding. Click there and keep watching, because the story of these legends deserves to be told all the way to the end.